access useful analytics of your organization, group, or portfolio. The Analytics section is one of the main features of Fluid Attack's attack resistance management platform. There, you can see information about the status and characteristics of vulnerabilities we reported in your system, as well as your remediation practices, represented in numbers and charts. You can access analytics in 3 sections. There's one for your entire organization, one in each of your groups, and one in each of your portfolios. These portfolios are sets you create to further organize the groups in your organization. Let's see the analytics of an organization. The first chart you see shows you your system's exposure to risk caused by the reported vulnerabilities. This is given in CVSSF units, which result from our adjustments to the CVSS. Our CVSSF metric gives higher values and more visibility to vulnerabilities with higher severity scores, but whose risk could be underestimated because they appear less often. We calculate this risk exposure because we recognize that the report based merely on the number of vulnerabilities and their qualitative categorization by severity on the CVSS does not reflect on how a single critical vulnerability represents a big threat. Here, you see the risk exposure level over time. Below, you see during the current sprint, how much your risk exposure is increasing due to new vulnerabilities, how much it's decreasing due to effective remediation, and what's its resulting percentage change. There is also the current percentage of risk exposure you have remediated, the number of particular cases of vulnerabilities that are still open, and for how many of them a treatment has not been defined. In the next chart, you can find out the total units of closed, accepted, and reported risk exposure over time. To clarify, accepted risk exposure is the one over which you have decided not to exert any remediation efforts temporarily or permanently. You can see this information expressed in percentages in the next chart and also benchmark your risk exposure against that of the best, the average, and the worst performing organization. Moving on, you can find out how it has changed lately with the report or remediation of some types of vulnerabilities. Learn how many days have passed since the last remediation and how much it takes you to ask us to verify the effectiveness of your fixes, as well as how many vulnerabilities are being re-attacked and the total number of days we estimate it will take you to remediate all the vulnerabilities reported until now. Then, there is a chart showing how your remediation rate compares to that of other organizations, and one that does this kind of comparison with the number of days you spend on average remediating a single unit of risk exposure. You can further find out how this performance differs across the CVSS qualitative severity ratings. The next chart shows the percentages of closed, accepted, and open vulnerabilities in your groups. Below, you'll see the percentages of accepted vulnerabilities among the other open vulnerabilities by their qualitative severity rating. You can find out what has been the maximum CVSS score reported for the vulnerabilities in your system and what's the score of the most severe vulnerability you haven't remediated. Then, you will find pie charts showing you the rate of vulnerabilities whose remediation you have already assigned to your team, the shares of open vulnerabilities between the groups in your organization, the shares of vulnerabilities without a defined treatment between those groups, and, of all the vulnerabilities with an assigned treatment, what percentage is open, and what is closed. The next bar chart shows you how much some reported types of vulnerabilities contribute to the current exposure. Then, the next ones show you the open risk exposure and the number of vulnerabilities differentiating by your groups. Moving on, you find a pie chart showing the proportions of open vulnerabilities according to the treatment they have received at the time. Next, there's a chart with the proportions of vulnerabilities by source of detection, applications, infrastructure, or source code. Another one shows you how much of your target of evaluation is distributed in repositories and how much in environments. Then, there are the numbers of total types of vulnerabilities and particular cases reported. See how many vulnerabilities have the tags that you have created, how many are classified with a certain internally defined level of priority, and how many have been accepted by each user in your organization. The next charts show you information split by groups about the number of unsolved events and the total reported types of vulnerabilities. You'll find out which types of vulnerabilities have been open the longest, and see the share of vulnerabilities between the groups in your organization. To the right, learn the percentage of vulnerabilities found by each security testing method. You can see how your team members treated the risk exposure assigned to each of them. For example, what percentage of risk exposure that was assigned to a specific user has been closed, accepted, or is still open. There's also a chart showing the files that have had the highest numbers of vulnerabilities over the last 20 weeks. Then, see the percentage of time during which each group has had unsolved events since its creation. And see the duration of the oldest unsolved event in each group. Lastly, you can visualize the amount of each of your tags being used in each of your groups. Let's go back to the top of this section. Here, you have the options to download all the analytics as a PNG file and a file with all the vulnerabilities reported to your organization. If you explore the analytics section of one of your groups and you have our devsecops agent enabled, you'll see relevant information at the bottom, like if the agent is active or inactive, how many times your team has used it to check for vulnerabilities, and the number of your repositories and branches on which it has been executed. You can also learn the number of times you have deployed your build with strict mode enabled, preventing risky code from passing, and how many with it disabled, as well as how many times our agent has broken the build compared to your number of successful builds. You can learn more about our devsecops agent in our video, installing the devsecops agent on Docker and viewing its execution logs. Bear in mind that almost every chart in the analytics sections presents you with the options to open our documentation, download, reload, and expand. Further, some charts have a filter option that allows you to see them from a different angle. For example, suppose you want to see, instead of the risk exposure, how many vulnerabilities have been reported, accepted, and remediated over time. You can use the filter option to look at that information. It also lets you choose to see only the information of the last 30 or 90 days. You can also look at the open risk exposure by type of vulnerability in code, infrastructure, or application only. Or even see the top types of vulnerabilities with more particular cases reported in the system. These are most of the analytics we have for you on our platform. Visit our documentation to learn about all the charts and figures. And make sure to explore this section in your organization, groups, and portfolios so that you can make comparisons between indicators that can help you have a better foundation for decision-making in managing your security vulnerabilities. Fluid attacks, we hack your software.